I've actually just come back from Kiev. I was there 48 hours ago. And I was there at a really extraordinary moment. Over this past weekend, the Ukrainians made an extraordinary and unexpected advance. They went hundreds of miles into what had been Russian-occupied territory. And the reason they were able to do that was not so much their brilliant strategy, although that of course helped. It was also that the Russians began running away. They were leaving tanks, they were leaving armored vehicles, they were leaving weapons, and they ran out of the region. And although we've all been expecting, a very long stalemate or a war of attrition, probably or possibly ending in a Russian victory, I don't think we've spent enough time thinking about what the consequences of a Ukrainian victory would be, defined as Ukraine taking back at least the territories that were occupied since February the 24th, but maybe even going farther. What the consequences would be for Ukraine, which would then become a very different country with a different role in the world, but also for Russia, where I think enormous political changes would then take place. One of the most interesting lessons is that the conclusions that we draw are based on the statistics that we use. And the statistics that people were using before the war, in other words, to measure the relative power of Ukraine and Russia, were numbers of missiles, numbers of guns, how much ammunition, how big a population. And by that calculation, Russia was going to win easily. And that was, of course, the calculation that Russia made, but also that many people in Washington and European capitals made as well. We left out a psychological element, namely that Ukrainian soldiers would be fighting for their homes and their lands and their identity actually as a nation. And the Russian soldiers were fighting for their salaries, and many of them didn't want to die for a war they didn't especially want to believe in. And they simply didn't want to take risks on behalf of Ukraine, not a country many of them ever wanted to invade. And that difference in attitude and that difference in thinking and preparation for the war has resulted in something very different from what we expected. And had we taken that more into consideration, we might have had a different idea about the outcome. However this conflict ends, its geopolitical consequences are going to be enormous. If Ukraine wins, in the sense that Ukraine pushes out Russia, declares some kind of victory, and Russia is seen to be defeated, that could lead to the end of the Putin regime. It will certainly create a different perception of Russia in the world. Russia will no longer be seen as the power that it portrayed itself as. It will have an impact on Russia's influence in Africa and the Middle East. It will also, I think, have an intangible but real effect on other countries and other democratic movements around the world who will begin to see their causes as not so hopeless. Russia portrayed itself as an unbeatable autocracy, and it turns out that it's not that. And if they aren't unbeatable, then maybe others aren't as well. And I think you'll see an impact in places like Venezuela, Burma, even Iran. So what we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine is not so much cycles. What we're watching is a gradual decline of the Russian Empire, really from the 19th century to the present. It revived during the Soviet period, it declined in 1991. It's trying to revive again. I believe it will decline further. The surprise might be, and this is not a prediction, it's just a guess or a conclusion drawn from what we've seen. The surprise might be the breakup of Russia itself. That different pieces of Russia, Chechnya, some of the other republics, perhaps Siberia, the western part of the country, begin to ask why they should continue cooperating with a central government that's acting against their interests. And the breakup of Russia will have an impact on energy markets, on the economy more broadly. But I would stress that some of this impact could be good. The withdrawal of Russia from Europe and from what Russia calls its near abroad, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, would have a real stabilizing impact on that part of the world. So suddenly, places like Ukraine would become safe investments rather than risks. So there are both risks and dangers in the end of Russian power and of Russian empire. I spend a lot of time writing about revolutions, inside autocracies elsewhere. And I realized recently that I knew less about the American Revolution than I thought I knew. And so I started reading books this summer about the American Revolution. And I can recommend Gordon Wood. He's been around for a long time. His books are old, but you will find new things in them. One of his books is called The Empire of Liberty. And it's about the period just after the Revolution, when the United States were consolidating. And it's a much ropier, more complicated, more violent, actually, period than we remember. We think the revolution happened and, then it was happily ever after, and that was really definitely not the case. And all the founding fathers hated each other, and there were terrible political squabbles. It almost makes you feel better about the current political divisions. Another very good book of his is called The Creation of the American Republic, and it's really about the idea of American democracy and where it came from. And if you're interested in how democratic ideas spread, I really recommend it.